Okay, here's our interview with Judd Dunning.
Did you have some type of political conversion at some point?
I did. 9/11 was a wake up call for me because I literally sold everything at Colorado Socialist University. I was so brainwashed.
You went to Boulder.
I went to Fort Collins.
Fort Collins, okay.
Yeah, and it was amazing because the professors were so leftist. I really don't remember ever having the counter dialogue. And I was, Michael Moore and Al Gore and Oliver Stone just the Clintons consumed us. I ended up selling everything. I became a civil liberties lawyer, pre-law. I signed up for the test. And then I took an acting class just to, advance my sales and legal, and I did well. And I got kind of scouted and a lot of incidents happened. And then I ended up getting my final credits at ACT, and I sold everything to become, swear off white oligarchical Christian repressive America.
When you say sold, help me understand, sold everything. I mean, first of all, what did you have? You're in college, so.
I didn't own that much. My dad just gave me a brand new car. He's like, what the hell, man? Why are you selling this brand for graduation?
And you sold it and did what with the money?
I moved to Europe.
Okay. With the intention of just hanging out, or?
No, just giving up on America. I really was that. And then I came back, and the next thing you know, I was in Hollywood.
And what was, just since we're going to be talking a lot of politics in this, I mean, what was your view of America at that time?
Pretty much a very similar view to what the left is trying to sell again in 2020. Is that systematic racial injustice is a key element, a key problem, that we took this land brutally by force, that we're really run by the military-industrial complex's relationship to war, that we're destroying the planet, that we should create fairness over equal outcome over equal opportunity. I mean, it was a pretty dark place, but a woman's right to choose is preeminent over life, which I talk about in my book. I talk about this in my book at the front, but I've been a hardcore check the box conservative for 15 years.
So what do you think made you susceptible to all those views at the time?
I just say a lack of a rational alternative discussion, just similar to what they're doing right now in big tech and in our society, is they're just silencing a dissenting view. I didn't have any mentors. It's interesting, my family's Republican, but they're so Republican that politics are like the bedroom. You could leave them in your bedroom. You didn't have to talk about them. You could have good labor, Democrat friends, which I still strive for today. I have a lot of liberal friends, and I'm trying to hold and create a container for them. That's what the book was about, because, man, when you start losing so many people in your life, thousands and thousands of people, simply because you came out against Obama, simply because you came out in pro-family, pro-gun, pro-small government, there was just and I talk about this at the beginning of the book, there was such a sea that when my dad died, I went up to his cabin and I said, hey, let me make sure my facts are 100% clear. I've been studying them for 15 years. So I went into the discussions of 13 and a half reasons that I got from doing a Politicon panel. And I took Evan Sayet and Eric Golub and Adam Yenser and Michael Loftus and a number of other conservative minds. And I said, what are the core 13 reasons we choose ideology? And what are the arguments? And then, we went into science, history, philosophy, and journalism, and we substantiated them. And we looked at the alternatives. We're like, they once again, they don't win. It was almost like a revesting of principles to anchor in and distill. And that's what I created the book for. Before the election was to sway, but we ended up coming out late because of COVID. So we rewrote the book, and it's more of a conservative compendium of ideological thoughts of how you defend yourself and then how to argue. And I think it's really, it's a great handbook for the road ahead. What's interesting about it is that even though I wrote it, I don't hold it all in my head. I'm not a Jordan Peterson. I am not a Ben Shapiro like many of us. We work from our ideological principles, but then our arguments, in practice, we distill down our 4 or 5 points. We distill down how to break up our logical fallacies. Most of us need help because we're personally attacked now in a different way than we were before. you can I can get somebody off their skis by calling them a bigot and a racist, or intellectually inferior or broken. What's that?
Or a Trumper. I mean, simply being a Trump supporter is ostracizes you, in and of itself.
Absolutely.
So tell us about how 9/11 impacted your thinking and the conversion you had after 9/11.
Well, it was interesting because I had a Buddhist, actually in this back property now that we're working out of. In the back of our property, we had the Buddhist teacher that my wife and I met through. Even though my wife is Jewish and I'm Christian, we met at a Buddhist retreat and married and have Jewish kids that we've raised, which makes us Californian. But this teacher was was a Buddhist, and you would think a Buddhist would not be a hawk, and he was kind of a neocon hawk. And because of his connection to breaking through moral relativism to moral absolutism, as the truths that actually even resonate with the Buddha. The Buddha believed in the natural, anyway, long story. Christ was definitely influenced by the Eastern thought that came before him. And, I was open because I didn't expect the message to come from one of the top Buddhist masters of the United States of America based on truth. So he cracked my lens and he invited me to a group. And then a bunch of California liberals for 15 years, I call my family, in a small private group called Conservative Conversation. We just started reading books after books. And I remember when I got to Liberal Fascism with Jonah Goldberg, who I've met now several times, I was like, wait a minute, this is the big lie. This is the big switch. I've been sold the wrong the wrong story. I've given up my seniority of thought and emotion and choice.
And what was it about the 9/11 event itself that was some kind of a wake-up call?
I think for some of us, it takes a crisis to awaken. And I think, I would say now, looking back as a conservative, is the more that I'm a big fan of military history. I always have been, but I wasn't looking at it the right view. And I think what we've done is we've started to tell, like Howard Zinn's message, that we're marauding opportunists versus the fact that we're reluctant interventionists, that we don't steal oil fields, we don't rape and pillage, we don't take over countries, after we leave them. If anything, we get drug into them too long because we're trying to actually put in the essence of democracy. So 9/11 was, home court. Just, you and I were attacked directly on American soil. We are on the edge of war. And that's what it took for me to wake up.
Yeah. Well, what's amazing about that and looking back at it was the patriotism that of the response, and people flying flags at their homes, people flying them on their cars and so on. I mean, it really was pretty unifying moment in many ways in America. Yeah. I mean, Bush, here's a Republican president that for the most part, Republican presidents get absolutely slaughtered. But he had enormous support, won re-election pretty easily because the nation really came together. And man, does that seem a long time ago now.
I would flip it over and say that the unifying force of the wars after 9/11 that kept Bush in office for a second term is parallel in an inverse way as the medical tragic aberration being COVID that took Trump out. And so a war on Trump and a war on this virus that decimated his incumbent strong economy gave a no candidate party this victory. And I think that's why we got paranoid. And I think that's why we got suspicious. That's why we checked into electoral college and fraud. So it's interesting. So we were unified by a tragic event, but the Dems were empowered and we were divided by a warlike event. That's what's really interesting. Because if you really want to keep somebody in office, start a war. Trump could have probably done it. Like if he wanted to start a war with Iran right now, if he was that kind of guy, he's not that kind of guy. He probably could have been the big distraction to bring us all back together. He could have stayed in by starting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was nothing unifying about COVID. I mean, it was dividing from the get-go as far as where it came from. It started with conspiracy theories about COVID itself, and then as far as how to respond to it and so on. And you almost seem to always have a left and a right view about how to respond to COVID. I think it kind of broke down to individual rights versus collective good. So you naturally had the right, who's very into individual freedom, being very suspect of the idea of lockdowns. And the left, it's all into collectivism and everything being equal for everybody. Said, no. Everybody stay at home, close down everything. That way everything's equal. And from that point forward, COVID has further divided the country, I think.
Yeah, exactly. No, and that's what I point about the inversion. It was a great saying. It was non-unifying, but they got handed. The only reason they won was COVID. There was no way they were going to take this president down with his employment and stock market and economic numbers. I mean, we were unstoppable. So I don't know. I cannot go. There's a Rabbi Finley that we see, and I like what he says. He said, you can test a conspiracy by the fact that people start committing suicide, because there is a moral center, and we want to go down these. Eventually, people would pop up and kill themselves to cover things. Now, interesting, there are a couple suicides right after what happened in Washington. Interesting, right? Within the law enforcement, a couple guys killed themselves. So, but it's a good point. Like are we on the air?
Oh yeah, we're going.
Really? Okay. All right.
Yeah, sorry. We just keep talking. My producer picks a beginning and an end. So.
Oh, great. Well, good. Then I won't name anybody. That's what I want to say. But I know certain people that are just running down this, and the Q thing was interesting, right? Because it was about Trump brought up fake news, and then from fake news we had, definitely it became almost like an analysis game that a lot of people got involved in. So I want to say, good job, America. We're no longer aware of where Paraguay is. I mean, we were pretty unconscious people before fake news came along and said Americans need to think more deeply. And now we've gotten so deep into the wormhole that there is some danger to overthinking things. So anyway, people would start killing themselves if big conspiracies actually happened. And some are and some aren't. But I can't go into the one about Wuhan being intentionally started. That's such a deep and complicated premise. I just think it was a real aberration.
So now, as we try to bridge the divide between the two sides and try to demonstrate that our side, so to speak, conservative side, is the voice of reason, but you've got this Capitol break-in event that the left is now using to just throw everybody on the right under the bus. That, see, we've been telling you from the beginning, Trump was dangerous, his supporters are dangerous, these white nationalists, et cetera, are dangerous, and just casting the whole right aside. So it's making the task even more difficult now to bridge the divide. But, I guess the first question is, as somebody who is, on the right, what do you have to say about the Capitol break-in?
Well, I just did an article on Newsmax, and it was about the three big reasons. The one, first of all, is that the rule of law exists anyway, regardless of whether left or right or politicized. There were 14,000 14,000 arrests during the 400 cities that we had George Floyd protests in. On this one, we've had like 80 so far, a few more than 80 was the last couple of days, and 5 dead. We had 19 dead on that night, and on George Floyd, and 96,000 National Guards deployed, and $2 billion worth of damage. So I'm not going to be gaslit on the fact that we are the violent ones. That is so inaccurate, so untrue. I mean, if you go to the G20, it was all leftist, fascist destruction over there. If you go to Berkeley, if you go to Harvard, America is known for leftist violence with an occasional aberration of right-wing violence. And then also, so that's the first context, is law and order exists outside of policy, and it actually functions. The second thing that I said about the Capitol riots is that Trump's speeches on paper were fantastic. It's just like listening to his Russian call on paper. It was actually right down the line. He immediately retracted. The third major point is that the Norfolk, Virginia FBI said because of COVID lockdowns, they said we need to make Congress pay. People are angry. Why did George Floyd blow up? Because people were angry about COVID. We've never been shut down. We're still angry. If anything, we're angry as a lot of people are sliding into long-term devastation. So the Norfolk, Virginia FBI gave a warning that they were planning to bring a riot to Congress before Trump incited. So Trump incited, they said, and the reason they impeached in 8 hours. But the truth was, is it was already in motion before he got there. And it was already multiple groups. So But
right-wing groups.
No, they weren't. They were a mixture of multiple groups throughout. I mean, look at this guy, John Sullivan. He's definitely not. He's definitely not to the right. The guy that was filming it, coordinating it, sitting in the corner when the young Babbitt, what's her name, got shot. That guy was definitively aligned with the left. There's a lot of leftist people in there, and they agitated and they grabbed in some other people, So I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. I think it was a big setup, and they really want to destroy the Trump legacy. And look, the way we did a show last night, we said the reason that Trump got impeached twice is because that's how dangerous he is to the system that exists, that he's been draining the swamp for a long time, that he's that kind of free speech advocate. I'm not going to go to sleep on this.
Yeah, but I mean, bottom line, the right, Republicans, et cetera, condemned the break-in, condemned the violence right away, which is something that you didn't see.
Kind of law. Yeah, right.
Which is something you didn't see from the left. But I mean, it does appear that primarily maybe it was infiltrated a bit, but you tell me if you feel differently. It does appear that it was primarily these hardcore right-wing groups that were behind it, basically under the presumption that this is a stolen election and we need to go in and take it back. This is our moment. The same reason why we have the Second Amendment, which allows us to carry guns in case we're faced with a tyrannical government. I think this was a call to action by some of these extreme groups that thought this is our moment. This is the time we need to rise up and take our country back. Isn't that what you saw?
I think there was a coordinated agitation which recruited a lot of people on the right that were in that position, but I'd actually go back and place the blame on the media for one thing they did. Look, man, we came out and Trump challenged election integrity, which is always election fraud. It's just a matter of whether it throws off the Electoral College at the end of the day. That's why we have Electoral College, which they're trying to eliminate right now and go to the popular vote, which is absolutely crazy. But what did they say? They said false, baseless, and conspiracy-based instead of alleged claims from the very beginning. That pissed me off. I know enough about the law. I know enough about due process to the media can't claim eminent domain over my individual rights by saying false, baseless, conspiracy-based. That would be in court. That would be, hey, conjecture, presumption. But
then they do. By the way, they do the same thing about the break-in. It's basically the Trump incited break-in. They flat out. I forget some of the quotes. It was on 60 Minutes piece from last night, where they just flat out say that Trump directed the Capitol insurrection, and you're just supposed to buy it. It's unbelievable what they're getting away with in what is supposed to be unbiased reporting in the little stuff that they slip in. So you're right. So yeah, I think that this, but you could all chalk it up just to the polarized environment that we're in, where basically people are getting two totally different sets of facts. And yeah, it's super frustrating to say that if you mention anything about election fraud, you're going to be taken down from YouTube. And it's super frustrating that, from day one, they were, not accepting of the Trump election. So that's created this fevered environment for sure. But at the end of the day, I mean, there's no excuse for what happened, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so funny. We're saying suddenly Democrats are Republicans on Law and Order. Suddenly they're like, build a wall around the White House to protect what we're doing. It's like suddenly they're. Yeah, I love. What
the shoe is on the other foot in so many respects on this. But as we look at the violence that came over the summer as a result of George Floyd and so on, and the left violence, they're going to say that, well, that was a very small radicalized minority of the left, just like you have a small radicalized group on your side. So is that fair?
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, look, I was looking at Wikipedia last night just in general, and they said that 96.43% of George Floyd protests were peaceful. I was like, oh, that's an interesting statistic. But what matters is how radicalized and organized was that, 3.6%. And I think what we had was some extreme Alinsky-eye, Weather Underground agitation. That was never let a crisis go to waste is absolutely a key element of the terms of socialism and communism and the progressive hard left, which, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, we found documents saying, hey, lie, agitate, duplicity, organize, flip, and turn. That's not hyperbole. The people that are organized with the radical left know the handbook inside and out. I mean, our last president was a devotee of these actual theories in order to get to a Machiavellian outcome, no matter what he had to do. So that's really happening. I mean, if you read the new organized document I was telling you from AOC and the Squad and BLM, it's basically saying, let's defund the police and let's fund education. 16 million people should be given jobs immediately. Reparations should continue. We should privatize companies that are taking assistance during during COVID. It is a socialist manifesto putting a bar for how far Biden can go. It's already on the table. So if that's real, then I would say the organizing elements of what was it? I mean, 2 million people went to Washington, and we had, a handful, 200 probably at the head acting up. But I got to challenge this a little bit, James, because I've been doing a lot of watching of the videos and looking on the judicial arrests. There's a lot of leftists in this group. So it looked pretty coordinated to me, and I think they grabbed the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Well, I certainly say that's one of the reasons why it's absolutely absurd to impeach so quickly. Not only does what Trump said not rise to the standard of inciting violence under the criminal code, but there hasn't been the most basic investigation as to who was behind this, how it all happened. It's like it happened, boom, impeach. Yeah. I mean, if hypothetically this was something that was planned by a leftist group, basically to make Trump look bad, then does he deserve to be impeached if that's the case? Obviously not.
Yeah. I mean, I think Graham is tapping into Schumer and saying, let's stay in rationality. Let's lead forward. I think if they're going to take control, they're taking control of the office, then and with 25,000 troops there, I think they're trying to back off of this and focus on their agenda. Hopefully there's enough rationalists out there that, they don't have to follow through this. And we don't even know the legality if you can impeach a president after office anyway. Mm-hmm.
So going to your book, a couple of things I want to point out is that, it seems, you had your own conversion. You make a note in there about, as far as kind of bridging the divide, how to change hearts and minds, or at worst, preserve a few more mutually respectful relationships with more ease, clarity, and dignity. So what is it that you would like to see as far as the discourse in America that you think could help bring us back together?
It's funny because, right at Thanksgiving when things heated up, Sean Spicer had me on his show on Newsmax. And I said, well, I'm reverse my position. The middle is dead. I said, the aspirations of our book are on hold until after January 20th. So the first thing I have to say is you have to acknowledge reality right now. You can't talk to the unconverted. They're saying, Parler was screaming into an echo chamber. I'm like, oh, that's okay. If the echo chamber is getting bigger and people are getting clearer, because they didn't tie any of the violence that was projected back into Parler on that, by the way. It was organized on Facebook, funny enough. What would I like to see? I would like to see the following, being the fact my best friend is a Democratic socialist Bernie-crat who's one of the delegates here, and we have wonderful conversations. I'd like to see people nestle into gratitude first. I think that's a big perspective. If you can get to gratitude in history, like when you're connecting with somebody, you have to say, do you appreciate the life that you have, the justice system that you have that supports the free markets to allow us this amount of prosperity here? Do you appreciate the free speech that you can actually have hate speech and even challenge censorship? Do you appreciate the dominant geographical superiority that America has just by the nature of where we're located in relationship to the world, and how strong our military is, 13 times larger than the people, what that costs? So if somebody knows enough to be in some sense of gratitude, there's a context. That's my big deal. I throw people out that just hate America. I'm not here. I'm not, I called the years of Obama the Amerishame years, because whenever he would speak at the UN, and this was definitely part of writing this book, he would just destroy every fundamental thing that we had as proud. And Trump would say, make America great again. So that challenged a lot of people. So if somebody has enough self-awareness to be aware how free we are, then there's a context to happen. So that's the first thing I'd like to nail down, is identifying that gratitude. And the second is, are they connected outside of emotion to having a discussion? If they are, then, engage. I want more people to substantiate. But the problem is, I find this in 75% of people on the left, they jump to convict, just like the impeachment, before they even hear the rational discussion. And I'm willing. I'm like, give me your point of view. Let's hear it. And then, if you know your facts, you can debunk it. And that, I can tell you once again, that's what our book is about, is just making sure that you have the entire arsenal clear. And I'll stand by this. We took We had the Millennial Institute. We had another company. I sent it out and I paid people to vet our logic and our facts.
But how do you get someone who doesn't agree with that side to even read this book, or is that not really the goal?
You know, I chose this title because I was kind of disgusted with the moral relativism of the show 13 Reasons Why. For, you know, I have young daughters, and I'm like, oh, okay, let's glamorize suicide. When Kurt Cobain did it in the United States of America, suicide went up in a certain sect. So we have to be really careful playing with that. So I grabbed the title because I'm a moral absolutist, but I'm not a traditionalist repressive kind of guy. I just lost my point of my thought. What was the question again?
Well, was it your hope or intent that liberals would read this book?
Thank you. That's my point. So I got into this book thing because I get a little emotional about it because my kids and what's going on in their culture. You know, we wrote a bombastic title. We could have done something else, and that's what the publishers chose. You know, I would love to see independents read it and say, you know, look, understand what your conservatives want you to understand about them, so you could have a real discussion. I mean, I think we wrote it kind of to influence the election and to validate what's working. But chapter 13 is Trump, but this is a timeless compendium of true facts that should sustain for years. I look forward to rewriting it. Can I get it across I can get it to the middle. It's hard to get to the left, James. It's just hard to get to the left right now. I don't know. That's the question. And that's what our next book is going to be about, is how do you navigate the next 4 years if we go into some radical, more socialistic left policies? What can we do when the Dems control every angle of government, and how do we do it with dignity?
So I have a friend who's in the process of starting a new media outlet right now, and he's got some pretty good money behind it. So it's got a legitimate chance. It hasn't launched yet, and I won't mention the name. But the idea is to get both sides talking to each other, and not just talking about day-to-day news, but basically, you know, the historical background of things, and, you know, a deeper dive into the big controversial subjects. But the whole concept is, they would measure success by getting people on both sides coming to this media outlet. Do you think in today's environment that has any chance of success?
It's an interesting question. Yeah.
I mean, one of it, just to finish, one of his premises is that, you know, people agree when it comes right down to it on more things that they disagree about. So the media is sticking us in these separate camps. But if we really sat down and talked and really talk things through, there would be more agreement than disagreement.
You know, I mean, I appreciate it on a media level. As far as, you know, getting back to some neutrality in media, that'd be great. I think that could succeed, a right, left, and center. I've always talked about that. It'd be great to have the news from two views, right? And just have somebody say, the news today, and you're like, and we see it as, you know, and moving on, you know, our interpreter will interpret. I think that's a great concept. I miss the neutrality of news. And I really try to look for it. I read across the spectrum, and unfortunately, it takes up a lot of your time. I mean, you know, in eudaimonia, in Greek philosophy of full prospering, we've got too much energy in politics. As my dad said, and one of the reasons I wrote the book is, if the government's working well, you shouldn't hear about it that much. That's what he said. I was like, it should be back in the background while you're living your life. It's not in the background anymore. So
it's become an inexpensive form of entertainment. You know, I mean, these news channels, Fox, CNN, MSNBC, I mean, they're doing extremely well. And when you think about their cost is nil. You and I were talking at the outset about how, you know, they don't pay anything for commentary and so on. So they've got a handful of people they got to pay a good chunk of money to. But they don't have foreign correspondents, you know, traipsing around the Middle East to pay for. They've got talking heads, not even sitting in a studio anymore because of COVID. They're all on Zoom, sitting at home. Yep. So it's very cheap, and people watch.
Yeah, no, they do. They definitely do. But I want to go back to your question. I was just thinking about the essence of it. Look, I need people to know that the government programs fail. Big government fails. There have been countless interventionist, catastrophic government mistakes that have destroyed lives and spread misery in the United States of America. I need people that I talk to understand the same principles. I'm not going to sit down I mean, big government exists, big free markets exist, but everything that we do. Go back to FDR's Great Depression. We struck 75% of his stuff unconstitutional. Only the war pulled us out of there. 72% illegitimacy rates came when we put in the war and poverty. The trying to make housing fair destroyed our economy. Solyndra failed. Obama said, shovel ready wasn't as shovel ready as we thought. There's just right now, I appreciate that people want to get to the middle, but big government doesn't work.
Well, what do you think about California's $100 billion bullet train? Isn't that a example of
Exactly. California, look, man, I surf. I just want to go on the record. The only reason I'm in California is because I've been here for so long. I was a young actor here back in the 80s, 90s. And I'm here because I have a great community and I love the water. But I don't even want to pay my taxes, man. I mean, I feel like I'm getting ripped off because they're mismanaged. I'm surrounded by homeless in West LA. I'm surrounded by crime. There is a functional meltdown of our California management. And all I see is Garcetti and Newsom just pandering to the presidency. I don't see them concerned with the day-to-day solidity of our economy whatsoever.
No, and they have a monopoly on power in California. I don't know if all of our listeners know this because they're across the country, but our legislature is 75% or more Democrats. Every single statewide seat is held by a Democrat. Los Angeles, I think maybe there's one moderate or conservative council member out of 14 or 15. So it's just an absolute total monopoly on power. The whole idea that it's checks and balances, and think about Washington. Washington's constantly going back and forth between Republicans holding Democrats. California is long gone, and I don't know how it reverses itself. I agree with you, though. It's such a beautiful place that they're going to have to really, really screw it up even more than they have to get me to leave.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard too, right? You get to a certain age in your life, you don't want to reconstruct your entire community based on politics. Look, I love politics, but politics are temporal. I believe in God. I believe in individual liberty. I believe in nature. I believe in my family. I believe in my friends. I'm serious, man. Just build my roads, protect my country, keep a basic level of safety in industry, break up big monopolies like what's happening with Amazon and Parler and everything that's happening with Apple and Google. It's getting out of control. Create an element of safety so I can prosper. And California is complete. It's the feel state. It's like, oh, I feel we should change something. And suddenly people are on the streets. We have a feeling. You're like, I don't care about your feeling, man. I have a constitution. This place is really distorted. But I have to say this. Liberals are beautiful. Now, why? Because let's have great education. Let's save the planet. Let's make the world let's all have peace, and let's make everything fair. What they essentially want is great. It's just conservatives are the adults in the room because we look at the fiscal realities and the executionary realities of the world. The world is a broken, scary place with a lot of evil forces. We have a very lucky thing here. We have to preserve it. So, it's hard to sit in that place of rationalism. I'm not going to leave California because it's being overrun by this socialism.
Yeah. So this is going to be our inauguration episode. So let's talk a little bit about the transition that's coming and how we move potentially past Trump. I want to get your thoughts on that. But let's start with the fact that Trump is not going to attend the inauguration. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, he's like, hey, man, I think it's pretty easy. If you look at the FISA FBI D class, which is very interesting. If people are paying attention, we covered that again and again in our show, Bullet Points. Look, it said there was spying because they tried to put somebody in the Trump administration. There were multiple reclassifications where Obama and Biden hid the fact that they had no evidence. They tried to justify the Steele dossier. It was denied. I mean, there's 17 gross errors. They said they didn't know the sources. They made it up. That D class is serious. So Trump's being asked, hey, this guy attacked you the whole time and ran a coup against your presidency. Why don't you just show up and celebrate the fact that he's in the office? The guy was attacked the whole time. If anything, I think it's a statement of dignity to not attend.
So for a guy who wants to help heal the divide, you think being the first president in 150 years to not attend the next guy's inauguration is okay?
Well, I mean, that's the liberal trap. I get what you're saying. I'm not saying you're presenting it, but that's the liberal trap. It's like, hey, there was some real bad action. Electoral college challenge, 25th Amendment challenge, impeachment twice, the Mueller report, and then now the Mueller report's turning out to be valid. So, look, it's hard. I mean, keep your enemies close and your friends close, your enemies closer. But I don't know what Trump's greater long-term plan is. I mean, maybe he's trying to be a voice for a new movement. We'll find out. But I kind of understand this because I understand what he's gone through. I think the left has acted horribly, and what they want us to do is like, it's okay. Let's keep moving. Everything's fine now.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm with you on all of that, but I'm up for both sides acknowledging where they go wrong and so on. And, when it comes to Trump's role in all of this, as I've already stated, in no way do I think that it merits impeachment, but statements like this that he was making again and again during the campaign, the only way we lose this election is if it's rigged. Now, that's a pretty absurd statement. Trump makes a lot of absurd statements, and so you just kind of roll off your back. But to continually rile people up in that way, to say that if we lose, it had to have been rigged, I don't think that's right.
I know where a lot of conservatives are standing right now, and I appreciate that. But if we'll remember, Florida was lost by 538 votes. I mean, just if you look at the specific numbers on the Masters, look.
Right, but point being what?
Mark Levin just came out and said there were violations how they managed the constant. Just yesterday, there were still violations on 4 states on how they managed deadlines on mail-in ballots. I mean, we actually had margins in multiple states. The Supreme Court failed us, James. They did not allow us to at least go into a rational inquiry. It was like, oh, well, that's this case, in this case, in this case. They could have made the choice to hear a case. They could have brought it. They could have kept us out of this violence. So I don't think Trump acted poorly. And I think I was door knocking for Romney and in the last election prior. And, I saw buses of people pull up in Ohio. A lot of people of ethnicity paid for by other people. I saw them go in and vote twice. I mean, there's always fraud. It's just a matter, was there enough? All we needed was a fair place to hear it out, but people are too scared. America went for stability instead of justice, which I get it. Look, we didn't bail out Bear Stearns. We didn't bail out Lehman. We bailed out Goldman Sachs. So I still think there was some bad. I'm not going to go down the route there wasn't fraud. I'll go down the route that they didn't give us the audience, at least to eliminate the possibility to unify us. So why?
Well, I mean,
sign off.
Yeah, look, I'm obviously with you, and you'd have to be dumb not to be with you to say that there was some fraud. Obviously, there was some level of fraud, right? Whether it's one vote or 1,000 votes or 1 million votes, we know that there's always some level of fraud. But it's incumbent on the person who is alleging fraud to prove it. And unfortunately, the way the system is, there's very limited time to do that. If you think about November 6th or whatever it is, and you got 2 months to get it all done, that's very, very difficult. And it's never been really done before. So it's an uphill battle. So I don't know clearly media tried to suppress any claim that there was fraud. So you clearly had that. But you had the court system, you had the Supreme Court, you've got a Supreme Court that's mostly conservatives right now. So, and they weren't able to do it. So, I mean,
on top of this, let's throw in the Biden situation. Media, big tech, genuinely suppressed. There was a huge outpouring of people left and right that said we might have to the left that we might have changed our vote if the laptop information had just not run in the realm of freedom of speech. Because if you look at the Presidential Act of 2018, you can't have any interrelationship with a foreign company. Now, what happens is, as soon as you're in the presidency in the United States of America, you're unindictable, essentially, besides impeachment. And it rarely happens. So our elites are not subject to law in the United States of America. So on top of this, Biden information came out. If you remember, he was definitely wearing a wire. They showed it. He turned halfway through and went from his brain-foddered timbre to just remember to mail in your ballots, come on, man. And he just changed like an automaton, and people just started, mail in your ballots, man. We don't need to hear the debates. And then they repressed that Biden agreement. Well, you know what? That laptop's legitimate. I mean, there's real compromises of somebody, the son of a president there. They've proven actually in a relationship. We've proven FISA. So I don't know.
Yeah, what's stunning to me about the laptop and also the suppression of Trump on Twitter and so on is that you see these companies that are willing to go against their own economic interests because to support the left, which is shocking to me. So
good point.
This was potentially one of the greatest, most fascinating stories to ever rise, that this idiot Hunter Biden leaves his freaking laptop at a computer store, and it turns out to have all this stuff on it. And it's absolutely confirmed 100% true. The FBI has confirmed all of this. It's on the front page of the New York Post, yet they still, they banned the post from Twitter and so on. So here you got the potential of a fabulous story, but they're willing to kill it simply because it's not supportive of the left's position.
Yeah.
And then the same thing with Trump. Trump made Twitter in the past 4 years. Twitter, who knows where Twitter would be right now, but for Trump. Yet they're still willing to kick the guy off after he made Twitter.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about the New York Post event. I mean, then Kayleigh was silenced. I mean, we covered it last night. It's like, now Jack Dorsey, I'm sorry, to me, he's the enemy of the state right now. I haven't elected him. He's not the fourth branch of government, nor is the AP. So we also had the media telling us that it was over. I've never seen stuff like this. So it's interesting. We're choosing a title for this new Newsmax All-Star. I got invited, Newsmax Back to Humanics. Humanics did our book. I got invited to write for them. So I just did our first one, and I just released a second article today, and we're looking at the title. And I'm unapologetically rational. So I think it's really important with what's going on with media. I don't want to be an angry person, but I'm like, hey man, you can't keep selling me the same repeated loop and telling me it's true because you repeat it and negating me every time I challenge free speech. So we're in a really dangerous place, James. And thank God for your cast here and the work that you're doing, and guys like ourselves. It's interesting though, because there's also this Wild Westing happening, as you said, in the media revolution right now. So it's going to be interesting how these are organized, and what's the future of the internet with everything that's going on. It should be interesting times.
Yeah. Well, last thing I'll cover, as I said, the inauguration episode and the future of Trump with the Republicans. I mean, Republicans are pretty divided right now because there is a pretty good constituency that feels that Trump did take things too far and that would like to see him just kind of move on. And then you've got the other constituency that is hardcore Trumpers and believe everything, was stolen from them.
Yeah. What is the future of Trump and the GOP? Look, I think what's more importantly is what happened to the GOP because of Trump. And, the McCain and the Romney, as we're seeing Romney's real recalcitrant rhino colors, right? It's interesting. And I back that guy. I still have a McCain sticker on my surfboard. I really went for the old school GOP because I choose one of two rational alternatives, which is big government versus over hyper accommodationism, which I think is deconstructive to our freedom and our way of life. So I think that the red pill of Trump was a real positive shakeup for the deconstructionist, anti-institutional element of what republicanism is about. How it's going to settle in and integrate, we'll find out. And I'm also a rationalist on a societal level because look, George Floyd, as negative as that was, we now have better training in police force. Me too. We now have a better workforce for women. How does everything settle in and get integrated into our society? So I think Trump really brought forward more of the importance that Americans want to stay ultimately free. I'm excited for what that's going to do in the party. As far as Trump, I think Trump's going to sustain. I mean, they're already talking about his daughters and how they're going to run. I think this thing about him really challenging at the end. I think he didn't want to. He's a dad. He's a granddad. I think he didn't want to ruin his kids' lives. Because ultimately, think about it. If he had actually really gone down, did the Insurrection Act or something, the entire family's lives would have been ruined and their legacy and their empire. And I think he hit that stopgap. So I think he's got greater plans in media. I think he's got greater plans for his children. And I appreciate everything he did in his 390-something achievements. He did a good job. But I think people are going to keep arm's length from him for a little bit. I think he's kryptonite for a while.
Yeah, I feel similarly. I think that, putting America first it was essential and something that had totally gone astray. So the whole idea that America first is a principle, I think this is going to say, and the wake up regarding China, I think that people are awoken as to China, people are awoken as to Iran. So I think those are the lasting. Yeah, I think those are the lasting things. Then, the negatives in my view is, the narcissistic personality that kind of makes everything about him. So that's why I'd love to see us move past him. And then also the fact that, was not a true, genuine ideological conservative. I mean, for instance, I was not a fan of this idea of $2,000 for everybody instead of the $600 for everybody. That, that was also bad politically, because I think it didn't help with the whole Georgia situation. But, this instinct that he has that's not grounded in traditional conservatism.
Yeah, I mean, he was a pro-life Democrat who was probably just going to church to do business. But I mean, that guy actually had. I mean, I know people close to him. That guy actually had a conversion in the process. He
right.
Really,
but I don't think it was a major conversion like perhaps you had. I've said this before, probably on the show, that I think that Schumer made a big mistake. Left would never acknowledge it, because everything just had to be resist Trump, resist Trump, resist Trump. But both of them are New Yorkers. They're both kind of the same style kind of guy.
Yeah.
Trump loves to be loved. You like him, he likes you, period. Schumer could have played the hell out of Trump if he had just come in there and befriended him. And I think they could have gotten a lot done together, and even some things that you and I may not have really liked.
Yeah, no, I agree. There were a ton of missed opportunities. And you're basically bringing up one thing about his personality. Sure. Look, I mean, I'm not some blind-eyed Trumper because I'm a conservative rationalist. I mean, there was some behavior that was crazy. I did like the transparency of his Twitter. I like seeing a president as a person. I'd never seen that. I mean, I know the speechwriters for Obama. I know those guys personally. They tell me their process. I mean, it was all a fabrication, and they were doing something else. At least we saw this guy on the surface, and I'm going to take that as a win.
The access he provided of himself to the press was unprecedented.
Yeah. So, but I agree what you're saying. A lot of missed opportunity because of hubris. But if he hadn't had that hubris, he was a pretty aggressive policymaker, and nobody wants to slow down and keep looking at his Trump achievements list. Just came out, and we covered him. They're real. That guy was unstoppably productive. I heard his process is, here's a meeting room of people arguing, and he just listened to next, and he'd go to the next one, next, do this, next. I heard his process was stellar and fast. So I hope that, look, I'm with you, man. I just got to tell you, I hope that our election process isn't really damaged on the level it could be. I hope that the Dems don't get hijacked by the left, because it's going to be war. I don't want a war at home. I want a war abroad when we're threatened. We're just going to have to, conservatives are just going to have to take every situation and decide, is this a warlike situation now, or are we Americans together? So it's
one final silver lining I'll just state about the Capitol break-ins. At least we've got the left now condemning violence and supporting the police, right? Exactly. So it's going to be very hard for them next time Antifa, gets all riled up. They're going to really be contradicting themselves if they don't speak up then.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you again to Judd Dunning. You can check out his book on Amazon, 13.5 Reasons Why Not to Be a Liberal. Thank you, Judd. Thank you, Michael Parker, our producer. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of The Hidden Truth Show.
Thank you for listening to The Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow. You can find us at hiddentruthshow.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hidden Truth Show. Join us again next week for another episode of Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow.